look at a blown-up version of the scorecard that every lacrosse official should have with them in every game. Now first I'm going to share with you a good tip to start before you even walk out onto the field. When you're sitting in your car, take out your scorecard and with your pencil, make a small square in the bottom of these sections. The first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter. I'll get to why that's going to be helpful in a little bit. But now, let's come to talk when we're talking with our coaches, where we're getting all of the important information that we need before we can get this game going. So first, on our sample scorecard here, we have the blue team versus the red team. During the captains, we get the captains from the coaches. So we have 17, 12, 22 for the blue team, 20, 4, and 5 for the red team. It's important to note that coaches can give you as many or as few captains as they want, but they at least have to have one captain. For me, I like to make a small note, a circle or a square around the speaking captain, just so I know who the one is that is going to be next to me during the coin toss. So let's go ahead and square up 17 and 5. Now I know that those guys are the speaking captains. Now, it's important to note from both coaches, you need an in-home, which is always the first attackman in the book. Should be listed as player number 1 in the scorebook. So we're going to go ahead and say this is number 12 for the blue team. Should be, again, the first attackman in the book. And then we'll use number 5 for the red team. Now, we come to the possession arrow. This is very important to get after the coin toss. We coin toss for alternate possession, which is this arrow here, and for goals to defend. But we mark down on our card who gets alternate possession first. So let's go ahead and say that we flipped the coin and that the red team won alternate possession, and they chose to use it. Make a little X for that possession arrow. So now that we have all of our critical information, we can get going with the game. And during the game, we do random stick checks. And for the high school level, we have to at least get 2 for each team, randomly. So we have a section called stick checks, which we mark each player's stick that we grab. So again, let's go ahead and say that in one quarter, we grab 23 stick, and in the other quarter, we grab 14 stick for the red team. And you just want to keep track of whose stick you're grabbing, because in the mix of players going back and forth around, you can forget what number it is. You want to be able to write down who you've got, and also who your partner grabbed as well. So you go up to your partner and ask, who do you have? I've got 23, you write that down, and you put that onto your own scorecard. Now let's get into the part that you're going to be using most often, the quarter by quarter report of who has scored which goal. So let's go ahead and say that in the first quarter we had 4 goals total. All right, 4 of them total. 3 from the blue team and 1 from the red team. We had 12 from the blue team, 17, and 24. Now, one very useful tip is to circle or square. I like to circle every number that you put in. That way, let's say for instance that, and I'll write this big, that we have a 5 and a 12. If I write them close together, which can happen if I'm quickly writing down to get ready for a face-off after a goal, this could be read as either number 5 scored, number 1 scored, or number 2 scored, or number 51 scored, or number 12 scored. That means that my scorecard is not accurate anymore, because I can't tell who scored which goal, and I got to rely now on my partner's card to help me out and figure out which goal is which. So it's important to write down, let's say number 5 scored for the red team, to circle every player who scores a goal in each quarter. So again, let's look at, say, the second quarter. 12, circle it. 17, circle it. 7, circle it. And this just helps you differentiate between which player scores and the other player who scores, and that way it's not all jumbled together and so you can't read it. Now, what are all the little boxes for? This is a very useful tip that I got from a friend of mine for keeping track of not having to count all the goals at the end of a quarter. And because sometimes coaches want to ask you, hey, what's the score that you got on your card? If they're not so sure of what's up on the scoreboard, you can look at your scorecard, immediately read what the score is. So let's say for blue, in the first quarter they scored 3 goals, so I'm going to write a little 3. And for the red team, 1. In the second quarter, blue scored 1, so I'm going to put a 1 here in the box. And the red team scored 2. Now instead of counting up, going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, all I got to do is go 1, 2, 3, 4. And I have the scores for the whole first half nicely encapsulated in my little squares. And that's just a very easy tip for keeping track of the scores through each quarter, especially if you have a whole bunch. You can have tons of numbers here. I'll just make X's. It gets tricky to go ahead and individually count each of those, but at the end of each quarter, if you write down, okay, we have 7 goals in that quarter, you can always just look at that little square and go, oh, we had 7, let's move on. Now, let's look at the last part of the card that is related to timeouts. That's the very bottom of our card. You have a quarter section and a time section. You want to use each of these sections. The most important being the time section, and I'll explain why in a second. For the quarter section, you write down which quarter the time out was used in, so first, second, third, or fourth. But the time is very important. The time is critical. It's important always to write down the time that we stopped the game at, because sometimes, and it happens, the clock may continue to run, or the person might bump up against the scoring timer and click the scoreboard on, or click the game clock on. And if that timer runs, you now don't know what the proper time was to restart the game at. But if you wrote it down, you can say, reset that clock to 6:19, let's get this game moving. So that's a very important thing to write down onto your scorecard, is the time that the timeout starts on. So, timeout, red, write down first quarter, write 6:19, click your watch or your timer to start timing that timeout, and we can get on with the game. This helps a lot with game management and keeping the game moving, and so you're not waiting there for suddenly what it turns out to be a 3-minute timeout. You always know which time the timeout started at, so we can get this game moving along. Well, that concludes the video for how to properly fill out your scorecard from the very top to the very, very bottom, and also some useful tips in between. If you guys have any comments or questions, feel free to post them below. Once again, my name is Corsetti with the Georgia Lacrosse Officials Association. Thanks for checking out this video, and stay tuned for more videos in this series.